31st Inter-sessional meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community started this Tuesday in Barbados. The US government has imposed sanctions on a Russian firm over alleged links to Venezuelan oil exports. 22 civilians were killed in the northwest region of Cameroon in what was described as an unfortunate accident. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Barbados, where the 31st Inter-sessional meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community started on Tuesday. Leaders gathered in Barbados to discuss the region's agenda in the face of the COVID-19 outbreak, the improvement of relations with the African continent, as well as the Caricom single market. During the meeting, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, called to strengthen the unity of the region, stressing that Caricom member states are a single family that no one can tear apart, despite their internal political differences.
The only people capable of defending our causes and our future and our development is us, ourselves. We may not do it overnight. We may not do it in a year. We may not even do it in a decade. But if we recognize that this integration movement is one of the most successful integration movements that was established in the 20th century, we then better appreciate the responsibility that we have to care it, to nurture it, and not to allow for any kind of political or diplomatic embolism to threaten its existence.
And Mottley, who is currently Caricom chair, also recalled the historic importance of unity within the region as a mechanism to support each other in the struggle against oppression.
We stand here because those who fought in the 1930s and those who created the political institutions that flowed therefrom understood that without unity they could achieve nothing, but with unity they could turn back the mighty hands of global empires who sought to suppress people for centuries.
And Caricom Secretary General Alan Chastanet called to act collectively to confront obstacles, including those related to global uncertainties and the devastating effects of climate change. He also addressed the situation in Venezuela, noting the dangers posed by foreign interference in the crisis.
Resolution to the ongoing situation in Venezuela continues to concern us. So far, all efforts at mediation have failed. In fact, from all indications, conditions in Venezuela continue to deteriorate despite a recent lull, and this is likely to make finding a solution even harder. The involvement of outside forces in the controversy, however, could only escalate the crisis and make a resolution that more difficult, while at the same time testing and stressing our own attempt at a common position on that issue.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, speaking on Sunday during a press conference prior to the Conference of Heads of Government, referred to an agreement with Venezuela that was blocked by US sanctions.
We have been working on a unitization of Venezuela for almost 20 years after we have discovered the Loran Manatee and other fields on our southern border. And we have been working on this for almost 20 years. And then recently, Venezuela got itself sanctioned by the United States, and that puts an end to that, because after 20 years, the Venezuelans cannot now move in the way that we were hoping from the first day we started out. So we have just got agreement with Venezuela, which is very significant for Trinidad and Tobago, saying, we agree that you can go ahead and exploit on your side, and we will do on our side. But that's a very unusual development, and it usually takes good cooperation between countries.
Haitian police officers continue to protest, demanding better working conditions and the right to form a union. Officers marched through the streets of the capital of Port-au-Prince on Tuesday to express their anger at the government's unwillingness to address their demands. They have since threatened to boycott next week's carnival festivities unless the demands are met. In recent months, Haiti has been rocked by protests calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Jovenel Moïse, who has been implicated in several corruption scandals. The European Union on Tuesday put Panama back on its list of tax havens after deciding the country had not done enough to meet global transparency standards. Panama, along with the Cayman Islands, Seychelles and Palau, was added to the list of 8 other territories already deemed to be non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, according to the EU Council. Panama was previously removed from the list in 2018 and placed on a halfway grey list under close scrutiny, after the EU accepted its promises to comply with rules on sharing tax information in the wake of the Panama Papers scandal. However, the EU has now considered that Panama did not implement the tax reforms to which it had committed by the agreed deadline. The United States tightened its blockade on Venezuela on Tuesday by sanctioning a subsidiary of Russian oil firm Rosneft that President Donald Trump's administration claims is propping up the Venezuelan oil sector. The sanctions announced by the US Treasury Department increased the pressure on Russia to cut ties with Venezuela. The sanctions freeze assets of the Russian oil giant within the US and punish global partners of Rosneft, as well as Didier Casimiro, the firm's chairman of the board of directors and president. The Russian government stressed in response that the destructive US sanctions policy increasingly undermines global world trade. Meanwhile, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza stressed in a series of tweets that the latest unilateral measures will be added to the lawsuit filed with the International Criminal Court on US sanctions against the country. At least 7 people died and 11 more were injured on Monday following the explosion of a car traveling along the Pan American Highway in Cauca department in the southwest of Colombia. Cauca is immersed in a spiral of violence generated by territorial disputes between dissidents of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the National Liberation Army guerrilla forces, and right-wing paramilitary groups and drug cartels.
Well, no, this is not an attack. It was a public transport vehicle that was traveling from Pasco towards Cali, and as it was moving, it exploded. As it was traveling, there was one vehicle in front of it and another behind. And at the moment that it exploded, the car in front and that behind also caught fire. All those who were traveling in the car that exploded were killed. There were 7 people inside the vehicle. Those who were in the 2 vehicles in front and behind were injured and taken to Rosas Hospital. It is an unusual event, and at this moment precisely the authorities are at the scene to verify the reason why the vehicle exploded while in motion, and they are undertaking all the procedures and tests needed to determine what really happened. The troops were more or less 1.5 kilometers away and arrived at the scene precisely at the time of the incident, as did the police, CTI, all to assist those injured.
And coming up, hundreds have marched to demand respect for Indigenous territories in Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back. The president of Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Tribunal stated on Monday evening that the process to determine which of the candidacies for the May 3rd elections are to be finally barred from standing is ongoing. Salvador Romero said the court will continue assessing the complaints received against candidates who registered for the May 3rd general elections, including former President Evo Morales, who is seeking to stand as a senator for his home department of Cochabamba. Around 60% of the original candidacies submitted are under review, according to a press release. And our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, brings us more on the developments there.
Almost 40% of the candidates nominated for different posts in the elections on May the 3rd have been excluded from the race, according to the Supreme Electoral Court. The numbers are as follows. 2,107 candidates were put forward. Of these, 1,278 have been approved. That means 797 are out. There is also a list of 13 candidates whose nominations are still subject to challenges, and about whom the Electoral Court says it will make an announcement as soon as possible. Among these is the candidate for senator from the department of Cochabamba, Evo Morales, who has become the main target of the right, which organized the coup last November. They are filing several demands to have him ruled ineligible. The hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the 7 presidential candidates of the right, the civic committees of Santa Cruz and La Paz, and other sectors that supported the coup are all demanding that Evo Morales be excluded. Either they argue that he doesn't meet the residency requirement because he had to seek refuge abroad after the coup, or they simply demand he be ruled out without presenting any particular reason. So Evo Morales and the other 12 remain in suspense, and the Electoral Court has until this Friday to publish the new list of candidates and thus resolve their situation one way or the other. It's worth pointing out that of these 13 still in suspense, 11 are from Evo Morales' movement towards socialism, including the mass presidential candidate Luis Arce and the former foreign minister Diego Pare.
A massive demonstration of Brazilian oil workers started on Tuesday at 4 p.m. local time. The protest came a day after Brazil's Superior Labour Court authorised the state-run Petrobras company on Monday to take disciplinary action against workers and their unions who have been undertaking industrial action for the past 18 days. According to the ruling, strikers could be fined up to $115 per day if the strike continues. The Oil Workers Federation plans to appeal the decision by the court, which declared the industrial action illegal. Union reps reported that more than 60% of employees from the Petrobras operational area had joined the strike, which now involves 21,000 workers in 13 states. The strikers are protesting mass layoffs and the Jair Bolsonaro government's privatization of the state-run company. The public holiday known as Family Day, celebrated on Monday, was marked in the Canadian city of Toronto by solidarity actions calling for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to leave Indigenous Wet'suwet'en territory. Around 8,000 people marched to the Queen's Park Provincial Parliament calling for respect for the Indigenous territory. Wet'suwet'en chiefs are fighting to block a natural gas pipeline project across their ancestral lands. Similar demonstrations and round dances were held across the country as direct action to block key railways continues. More than 100 doctors have signed an open letter calling for urgent medical treatment for WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange and warning that he could die behind bars in Britain, where he's subject to prolonged psychological torture. The letter, which was published by the Lancet Medical Journal, claims Assange is being denied medical care and expresses serious concerns about his physical and mental health. The doctors stress that politics cannot be allowed to interfere with the right to health and the practice of medicine. Meanwhile, 2 Australian MPs who flew to the UK to visit the WikiLeaks founder have urged British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to block attempts to extradite Assange to the US. Thousands protested in Greece on Tuesday against a new pension reform as a 24-hour strike paralysed transport and services. Around 10,000 demonstrators gathered in the Greek capital against the reform, which means having to work longer for a pension. The strike action brought public transport in Athens, as well as intercity trains and ferry services, to a standstill. The new Conservative government says the reform, to be voted on this Friday, will make the troubled Greek pension system viable through 2070.
Everything is going downhill. His pensions will be at a lower level and we won't be able to meet our obligations. That is the most important thing. We rely on our country to cover our health security and provide for us when we are old. And all that seems to be in doubt now.
Zoran Milanovic was sworn in as the 5th president of Croatia on Tuesday. President Milanovic said in his inaugural address that elections are a way of reaching a peaceful compromise between the wishes of different people, and that he will play a constructive role as president. For the first time, the inauguration ceremony took place at the official presidential residence in a forested area of the capital of Zagreb, formerly known as Tito's Villa, after the leader of socialist Yugoslavia, for whom it was built in the 1960s. And meanwhile, farmers in fluorescent yellow vests blocked highways in southwestern Spain with tractors and other vehicles on Tuesday, in the latest mass protest over what they say are plummeting incomes for agricultural workers. Several labour unions called for protest rallies, predominantly in the Extremadura and Andalusia regions, to demand government action to ensure more realistic retail prices for fruit and vegetables. Protests against high production costs and low prices for farm produce are posing an almost daily challenge to Spain's month-old coalition government, as the European Union plans to cut agricultural subsidies and the United States threatens to impose tariffs. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us. Welcome back. The World Health Organization has warned against a global overreaction to the new coronavirus epidemic following panic buying, event cancellations and concerns about cruise ship travel. China's official death toll has risen to nearly 1,900. The outbreak is threatening to put a dent in the global economy, with China paralysed by fast quarantine measures, and major firms such as iPhone maker Apple and mining giant BHP warning it could impact their earnings. So far, more than 72,000 people have been infected in China and hundreds more abroad. The WHO has stressed that the disease has only affected a tiny proportion of people outside its epicentre, and the mortality rate remains relatively low. Lu Xingming, director of the Wuchan Hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, died on Tuesday morning after all efforts to save his life failed, according to Chinese state media. Tributes have been paid to the director, who worked tirelessly to contain the spread of the virus. And of the 12 confirmed cases of coronavirus in France, only 4 people remain in hospital, Health Minister Oliver Véran stressed on Tuesday.
We're prepared for a possible outbreak. We're prepared for any coronavirus situation, and we continue to prepare for any eventuality should the situation change. All the patients who were hospitalized at the Grenoble University Hospital were able to leave the hospital, including the family who had been contaminated, an English family. The father with his son were able to leave the Grenoble University Hospital. Not only are they no longer ill, but they are no longer carriers of the virus, which means that as of today, we are left with 4 people who are hospitalized, 3 people hospitalized in Lyon, and the 1 person hospitalized in Saint-Étienne.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has undertaken a tour of African countries, which has so far seen him visit Senegal, Angola and Ethiopia. Pompeo met Ethiopia's Nobel laureate Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Tuesday in an effort to strengthen bilateral ties. Ethiopia is Africa's second most populous nation with well over 100 million people and is a key US security ally in the Horn of Africa. The US has encouraged Ethiopia to uphold its reforms and also to find a peaceful resolution to its dispute with Egypt over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is nearing completion. Ethiopia says the dam is crucial in helping to lift many of its people out of poverty, while Egypt warns that the dam poses a threat to its Nile River water supply. Cameroon's army described an incident in which 22 civilians were killed by a fuel explosion during a firefight in the northwest region as an unfortunate accident. Opposition parties accused the army of orchestrating a massacre, but army spokesman Colonel Cyril Anton Fac-Guillemot rejected the allegations. The United Nations reported that up to 22 civilians, 14 of them children, died in Friday's incident, which occurred in the village of Notumbo in Cameroon's northwest region, one of 2 English-speaking regions that have been grappling with separatist violence since October 2017. Niger's Tuareg community is holding its annual air festival in the northern Agadez region. The festival, considered one of the most important celebrations of this community, has been held since 2001. The festival includes songs and dances, poetry readings, camel rides and games. It attracts artists from other regions of the country and nations across the world. More than 2 million Tuareg live in the Sahara Desert area, stretching across Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria and Tunisia. The 2019 World Cup Rugby champion South Africa on Monday won the Laureus World Sports Award for Team of the Year at the award ceremony held in Berlin, Germany. It was claimed that the rugby team's victory united communities back in South Africa and was proof of sport's ability to change the world. The victory saw team captain Siya Kolisi become the first black captain to lift the Webb Ellis Cup.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed every single part of it, and one thing that I'll never forget what Coach Rachi said, it's really a privilege to play rugby in South Africa because you get to impact people's lives who don't play rugby, and it can bring a country together like we've seen in the past couple of weeks.
And finally, Cameroon will host the 2020 African Nations Championship in April. The 6th edition of this tournament, which exclusively features players from each country's respective national championships, will kick off on April 4th. The event will also serve as a warm-up ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations next year, an event that is known as the continent's showpiece football tournament, open to players in local leagues. Cameroon will host the tournament for the first time ever. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at TelesurEnglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.